it's a really great feeling to be able to do something like that with your coworkers. Hi, I'm Emily. I work at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and I work in our Office of Programmatic Services. So this role at the library is not public facing. I do a lot of behind the scenes work, developing programs, classes, events for adults to come to at the library. For example, I have worked on some free classes that teach adults how to use a computer and how to use personal technology. Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh is a fairly large urban public library system. It has 19 different locations. It's one large main location and then 18 branches.
And can you overview your involvement in forming a union in your workplace?
Yeah, I started organizing in late 2018, and that was right around the time when the organizing campaign got going. I started in December 2018 and worked on organizing with my coworkers through a lot of 2019. And then we won our NLRB election in August 2019. Then after that, we began forming our bargaining committee, who was elected in October. And I was elected to our first bargaining committee. And then after that, in November and December, we began meeting, surveying our members to find out what their priorities were and drafting proposals. Then we began bargaining in January 2020 with meetings about once a week until March in person. And then in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic started. So we stopped meeting in person. Our union organized to demand being paid during the pandemic. And then we also bargained with our administration about how we would be brought back to work. We continued bargaining throughout the pandemic, and we held meetings on Zoom. And then in December 2021, we had a tentative agreement, and then we ratified our contract in January 2022. So some of our issues that we bargained about the pandemic was helpful actually for the overall contract bargaining process, because it formed some of the basis for things that did end up getting in the contract. So even though it took a bit longer, it was helpful.
That's great. And what initially led you to get involved in the effort? Like, why were you inspired to be part of the union organizing campaign?
Well, I come from a union family. My father is a carpenter and was in his union. And my mother was a teacher, so she was in the teachers union. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and when I moved to Pittsburgh, I was very surprised that the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh did not have a union for employees. And so I had always wanted to try to organize a union, just because I believe that everybody deserves to have a union and deserves to have a say in the workplace and a voice on the job.
Yeah, and specifically, what workplace issues kind of spurred the organizing effort for you and your coworkers?
Well, one thing was that there was a pretty large pay disparity between administration and management and the lowest paid workers who are now in our bargaining unit. There was more of a disparity than at other comparable library systems in other similarly sized cities to Pittsburgh. So that was a big motivator for a lot of people. We also wanted more fair treatment. There was a lot of favoritism and uneven application of policies across everybody who would eventually be in our bargaining unit. We had at-will employment, so we had some issues with staffing, hiring practices, their ability to just let us go at any time. And we generally wanted to have some control and say in what happened in our workplace, and to be able to speak to the administration of our library on equal terms.
And I know you mentioned that your family was a number of your family members were in unions, but before you got involved, how much did you actually know about the specific organizing process? You know, like what it takes to win a union, and you know, if you know, and how did you build on that knowledge?
Yeah, so from my parents being in unions, I knew a bit about some of the benefits that unions provide to members, like representation on the job and when dealing with management, and generally better pay. I didn't know a whole lot about how all of those benefits were accomplished, and I didn't really know much of anything about how to go about organizing my workplace, even though I was interested in doing it. So once I got involved, I learned a lot through the process of organizing, and the staff at the United Steelworkers, who we decided to organize with, provided us with lots of resources, lots of information and training, like practicing and role playing how to have these kinds of conversations with our coworkers. And that really helped me, and I think all of the other people involved in our organizing campaign, to learn as we were organizing.
How did you find your national union, and like why did you decide to organize with the United Steelworkers?
Some of our members had personal connections with some of the staff at the United Steelworkers. I had two colleagues who independently of each other were thinking about organizing, and each of them were connected with the United Steelworkers in some way. And so although the United Steelworkers are an international union, they're headquartered right here in Pittsburgh too. So that was a big bonus for us, and a big part of the reason why we worked with USW for our organizing campaign.
And how specifically did you get linked up with the organizing campaign?
I had had some conversations, about the topics that ultimately led us to want to organize. And one conversation in particular with a coworker, that coworker talked to somebody who they knew who was already on our fledgling organizing committee, and then they reached out to me, and I was invited to a meeting.
And then, you know, how has your workplace already changed since forming a union?
I think overall there has been an attitude shift. We know now that we have each other's backs, and people feel like they have recourse and a voice and a say. We have a contract. We can push back if a manager doesn't follow what's in the contract. So a shift in viewpoint on that, on our attitude, and feeling more empowered, feeling more secure. We've been able to challenge discipline. We've been able to get employees who have been terminated. We've been able to get them reinstated. People can see from those kinds of things that the union is making a difference in helping. And as we go forward, we are able to attend the new employee orientations, talk to new hires about the union, and we generally get a really good response, and we're able to start getting them involved in the union right away. So I guess overall, I would say, to sum it up, it has been a big attitude shift for all of us.
That's great to hear. And just going back to the union organizing process, like what was it like for you and your coworkers to go through it?
It was really exciting for me because it was something that I had kind of daydreamed or thought about a lot. And it was, at some points it was kind of nerve-wracking. It was a lot of hard work and lots of meetings to attend. By the end of it, when we won our election, I felt very tired, but it was kind of a good kind of tired because a really good thing came out of it. So it was lots of meetings, lots of tracking where we were, one-on-one meetings with people, and then making sure we knew where our support was, where we needed to shore up that support. We worked really hard to secure an overwhelming majority, or to know that we had an overwhelming majority of support before we started to ask people to sign cards. And then also, as we were having people sign cards, we made sure that we got an overwhelming majority of the future members to sign cards before we filed with the National Labor Relations Board for our election. And United Steelworkers was really supportive. They helped us, providing a lot of that sort of structure of helping us to track where we were in the process, going with us to help knock doors, talk to people, all of those kinds of things. They really guided us through the process.
And since it was a long process, how did you and your coworkers stay united and motivated throughout that process?
I think we really formed a supportive environment. We had, for example, social events so we could get to know each other better outside of work throughout the process. And again, the United Steelworkers was really helpful, teaching us inoculation, like knowing what to expect from management, what they were going to say throughout the whole process. The library, Carnegie Library, hired a law firm. They gave literature to the managers and had the managers give it to us. They had a few meetings, and they weren't mandatory meetings, but they had a few meetings, and folks from our organizing committee were sent. We kind of agreed who would go to those meetings just to ask questions from our point of view, counter any anti-union rhetoric that was brought up at those kinds of meetings. And the library didn't directly retaliate against anybody who was on our organizing committee. They did lead a misinformation campaign, just with the kind of things that you would expect. And USW was right there, basically saying they're probably going to say this now, and then they would say things, the kinds of things, the standard things. So they were very helpful in that.
And then, having gone through the organizing process, what advice would you give other professionals considering forming a union, or already starting organizing their workplace?
I think it is really helpful to work with a national or international union because of all of the resources that they can offer. It was very helpful to have someone who had done it before, who knew all of the ins and outs of how to file the paperwork, the handling the cards, getting our election set up, and they really helped guide us. But they were always very encouraging and supportive and clear that they're providing that structure, but it was really us and all of the members and those of us in the workplace doing the work of organizing, because we're there every day. We know the workplace, we know each other, we know our colleagues, we know the work the best, and are able to make those connections between each other about the concerns and the issues that people do have at work. And with everybody working together, it's a really great feeling to be able to do something like that with your coworkers.
And you mentioned that you all have you've won your first contract. What are some of the wins in that contract that you all achieved with your collective voice?
Well, in the interim, after we won our election, while we were just getting started bargaining, the USW was able to even bargain a memorandum of understanding for a grievance process for issues of discipline. And that was amazing because it really laid the groundwork and the expectations for what we could expect as we were going through the process. And it we were able to build off of that to get a very good discipline and grievance articles in our ratified contract. We were able to get wage increases and negotiated good layoff and recall. And that was partly due to the bargaining that we did over all of the issues that were raised by the pandemic, because we bargained about when people would come back and in what order and how, and based on seniority. We were able to get more paid time off, particularly sick time and the ability to take a couple holidays that were paid each year for part-time members, which they had never had before, really. We got some clarifications of our job grades and our job descriptions, and things like volunteers not being able to do the work of bargaining unit members. And then I think probably the thing that was one of the biggest things is that we got everybody paid Family and Medical Leave Act leave, FMLA leave, for 12 weeks. So if even if you have just started and you haven't banked up a lot of sick time, to be able to be paid during FMLA, if you unfortunately have to take FMLA, after you use that sick time, you still get paid for up to 12 weeks. So that was a huge win for us.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining me.